This is Lessons Learned, and I'm your host, Matt Kennard, CEO of Better Lesson. Join me as we dig in with visionary state and district level leaders who share our mission to support every K-12 educator in developing the next generation of resourceful, compassionate, and resilient learners. Lessons Learned is brought to you by Better Lesson. Let's get started. All right, everybody, welcome back. Lessons Learned, Season 2. Today's a special one for me, and it's for a wide variety of reasons. It's a special one, but I get to talk to one of the most innovative and entrepreneurial people I have known in industry, who was also one of the very first people to open his arms to me coming into industry. He's been a Bloomberg Business Week's top 25 entrepreneurs under 25. He has created the thing that has replaced many people with TI-85s playing Mario in the back of their classrooms. But one of the most well-known online tools in math education, used by 75 million people. Of course, I'm talking about founder and CEO of Desmos Studio, PBC, Mr. Eli Luberoff, who I also have to say is a fellow Yaley, so it makes it kind of fun to get to have a little chit chat. And so this will probably be a longer episode because I've never met two people from Yale who can't talk for quite some time.
Not wrong.
But Mr. Luberoff, welcome to the show. It's so good to see you, man.
Oh man, thanks for having me. This is a total treat for me.
I had I was a late in life edtecher, and I had the good fortune of being at LearnZillion, and you obviously knew Eric and Alex well. And, I'm just going to put a plug out there that Eli, you are the epitome of what I hope for in our industry. And I think we as leaders should be doing, which is welcoming the folks who want to come and ply their trade here. So I'll always be grateful for that and your willingness to just hop in and welcome a new face. So,
oh man, that is the best to hear. I mean, we need everybody who wants to put their talents into the space. And so I'm so glad that you chose to do that back then. Loved working with you at LearnZillion. Have loved watching everything that you've done since. So I didn't know I got any credit for the fact that you're in this industry moving and shaking, but
100%. So I really appreciate it. And, in our season 2, we've been talking a lot about post-secondary ready students. We've been talking a lot about the idea that we need to think about rigor and pedagogy as a way to ensure that when kids graduate, whether they're going to 2-year college, 4-year college, right into industry, enlisted, they have the means that they need to actually be able to stay and persist in that work. And I think you have been at the forefront of making folks feel more comfortable with math as one of those key skills. And so excited to dive into that post-secondary readiness and rigor. But I think more than, it's always a curious story. You've been in education for a long time. You built out the calculator. You thought about Desmos as a real force for good around mathematics instruction. We obviously had Dan on the podcast earlier this season. Tell me, what is the journey that brought you here? What made you want to do this kind of wild and crazy thing that I'm pretty sure a number of people were like, TI calculators are still good, man. Everyone can just buy a TI calculator.
Yeah. Oh, I feel like our story, like many, is one of many, many happy accidents. So I never intended to run a company at all, if I'm being honest. And I definitely didn't think that I would run a calculator company. When I was in college, I wanted to be a physics professor and kind of pursued that path, did research over the summers, and paid my way through college in part by doing a bunch of tutoring, both in the New Haven public schools and a volunteer tutor for Yale. And then also I would head out to Westport, Connecticut and tutor the kids out there. And over the course of doing that, I've also dabbled in software from my earliest age. My first programming was on a TI-83 calculator. The irony is not lost on me. And I've got a huge amount of gratitude to that company for a few reasons, even though I don't know if they share that gratitude back in my direction. Well, I, as part of my work tutoring, built some of the early software with a friend who I've been working with now for 15 plus years to make it so that you could do some tutoring over the internet, and built into that the features that I really wanted to be able to use, writing equations and kind of a what you see is what you get way, and graphing them and seeing instant updating. And we turned that into just a free browser-based application, partly just to kind of push the boundaries of what can you do on a computer. I did not really expect it to be a business, and kind of fell into it backwards. And a lot of the story of what Desmos has done since, I think founders get a lot of credit for being these visionaries who can see the future or whatever. Maybe some are, but that is not me. So much of the best ideas of what's happened at Desmos have come from listening to teachers and what they say that they need, and working with people like Dan, who, he was the one who pushed us in a lot of the directions that we went. And so I feel like the journey of Desmos has been one of, a few kind of consistent North Stars, public education and free tools, and trying to get more people to like math by making the technology that we're looking at math through more familiar and friendly and powerful and beautiful and all those things. But the exact journey has been pretty stochastic. It's like a lot of listening to people and keeping my eyes and ears open, and trusting the people that I work with to have really good ideas. So how do we get here? Accidents, just lots of accidents.
But I think some of the best journeys, right, are when you are open to the world as it evolves. And I think so much of our educational journey is like that, right? Like if you can prep people, give them the tools, they have the opportunity to take advantage of things that happen and occur along the way. And I think there's some real beauty in that. And it maps to what I think is a lot of what folks are often afraid to talk about in education, which is we can't define every outcome from fifth grade. But what we can do is give folks lots of information, lots of access and touch points, and then let them make great decisions for themselves and their community and their families. And so I really love that journey, because sometimes the best things come out of things we didn't expect.
Yeah, no joke. No joke. Oh, that's spot on.
One of the things that I think is interesting, and I talked to Dan a little bit about this as well, math is like the scary subject, right? Maybe hard sciences as well, right? I think if I said the word stoichiometry, there'd probably like 50 people who are probably driving off the side of the road right now. But if we think about math as like a future ready skill, I'm of the belief it may be one of the most important ones that we teach, because it's A, universal across multiple industries, but B, it is a way to think about our world. And it's a tool. It's a helpful, translatable tool in so many respects that's grounded in fact. When you think about the evolution of math instruction, you all have played a huge role in the democratization of that type of kind of high rigor math. What has been the key of helping, innovative districts or partners really translate a new view for what math can be for students?
Yeah, I think a lot about this question, and don't have a crisp answer to it. But why is it that math is this, more scary than other subject? And I think it's one of these that is taught instead of ingrained, that math is scary. Nobody is afraid of math in second grade. And it's something that you like learn over time. You learn that it's supposed to be a thing that you're afraid of. You learn that there are some people who are good at it and other people who aren't. You hear from your parents that like they had a bad experience with math, and that gets passed on. And I think it's such a tragedy, because it is such a joyful subject when you are allowed to kind of approach it as something that's exploratory and that you might be good at. There's this research that Dan first introduced me to by this researcher, Gershon Harel, who talks about these kind of universal intellectual needs that people have, that are all extremely familiar. Like everybody wants to be able to communicate fluently, and everybody wants to see structure and make structure out of order, and the need for certainty. And math is so good for that. It's one of the only places that you can get to an answer and then verify it and get to it through another path and end up at the exact same conclusion. And all of these things are just very intellectually and emotionally satisfying to literally everyone. Everyone is born with these. And so, yeah, it's definitely a taught thing that math isn't for me, or that I should be afraid of it, or that I don't like it. Or, when people ask me what I do and I say that I work in math, and they're like, well, no follow-up questions, right? That's my experience. A lot of lift rides. And I think that's such a tragedy. But one of the enormous benefits that Desmos has had is that we haven't had to do the work of convincing people that, for example, a calculator is a good idea. And this is another place where I'm so grateful to Texas Instruments. I do not know what that process was like, of convincing schools and teachers and parents and people who are writing policy that, like, yeah, a calculator is actually a really helpful tool used at the right time, not, a crutch that is preventing us from being able to learn. And I'm sure they were fighting those. I know they were fighting those fights, but we haven't had to do that. And so the challenge Desmos has had is a much, much easier one from an adoption perspective, which is to say, all right, you know that calculators can be a good idea at the right time. You know what's an even better idea is, what if it was free instead of $100? What if it was accessible so a visually impaired blind student could use it instead of inaccessible so that they couldn't? And what if it was just like 1,000 times faster and used all of the colors and in a separate device? It's just such an easier story for us to say, here's this thing you know you like, and here's a version of it that takes advantage of the modern affordances of tech and is better in every single way. And so a lot of our efforts around changing how people relate to technology and how they relate to math, we didn't have to do the first part of convincing them to try using a calculator. And instead, we can just build stuff into the tool to make it more friendly. So a huge amount of our work has been, if you show up to this and you're not yet confident in math, does this make you feel more confident or less? Is it trying to be helpful as you go? When you type something, does it understand what you typed, or does it say, oh, sorry, you're wrong? Like, maybe go talk to the smarter kid in your class, right? We try in every single way to have it feel like it's working with you instead of against you. And so it's had this result that I think was kind of unexpected. You know, we originally thought, let's just take this thing that was expensive and make it cheap and better. We also have noticed, as you've mentioned, that as a result of that, and as a result of the design choices we've made and the speed that it can execute at and all of that, that people do in fact engage with the math in a different way and in a more confident way and in a more exploratory way than they could have with kind of the older tools.
I love that idea because it also is about use and usefulness, relevance to the day, right? And I think that, as someone who went to an institution that decided that unless you did regressions by hand for a quarter, you didn't really understand regressions. Institution not to be named. That's a silly way to teach math. Versus saying, like, here's a tool you can use, which, hey, by the way, if any of us were, a banker or a private equity investor or whatever, and we were handing someone, you're a home loan specialist, you're going to use a calculator in Excel when you hand someone their rate, or else they will sue you, right? Instead of saying, hey, here are the tools we can use to help make sure that we're going to teach you what this is, teach you application, then give you tools to make it easier to incorporate in your day-to-day life. We take this weird thing of like this red badge of courage that, like, if you can't do it by hand, if you can't do it pencil and paper, then we're just giving you a crutch with a calculator, versus saying, hey, here's what the real world looks like. Here's how you'll use math every day, right? Including being in the grocery store and saying, like, let me figure out what my grocery bill looks like. Serious plug for Algebra 1 right there, right? You want to know how many eggs you're going to be able to afford? You need to know Algebra 1, right? That disconnect to me of saying we hold this weird standard of you got to do it with pencil and paper and it's got to be born out of suffering, versus saying we're going to teach you the application of these skills and here's a unique tool to help you use it in all these other applications in your life and make you better. It seems like we hold this weird dichotomy, and I don't understand why we have decided that for math and probably science too, we have to do that, but we don't do that for ELA or history or science. History or any other subject matter that we choose. And it seems like we're shooting ourselves a little bit in the foot here in terms of making math skills part of our future ready skill set.
Yeah, there's a metaphor, and I think this one also was introduced to me by Dan. Of, if you really want someone to kind of appreciate a tool that you're giving them, you need to first have them experience that it is kind of a bummer to not have that tool. This is introduce the pain and then introduce the aspirin. And so I'm a huge fan of, for example, graphing parabolas by hand by plotting the points in the table until you're like, okay, I totally understand the relationship between this equation and this output. And then being like, you know what, this is actually kind of a pain in the butt. Like, translate it by 1 unit and you have to recompute all of it and you have to draw a whole bunch more dots, and that's a 2-minute process. And you're like, but I know what it's going to end up with. And that's the point that you introduce the technology. And I think that you're right, that there's this idea that you just like keep piling on the pain and never give the aspirin sometimes in math. There are also definitely people who are like, here, have this cheating tool up front. You never experience the challenges of not having it. And also it's then it feels like magic instead of like something that you can understand and screw. But it's having this
It's like
correct.
flipping the fraction, right? Like, that's great. It'll get you the right answer, but do you understand why?
Exactly. And so I feel like the key is to make sure that you're in that position where you're like, all right, this is painful. I get what's going on, but it's starting to feel tedious. Then you introduce technology. Now it feels like a gift to have it and you understand what's happening. But like never doing that second part is both making math a painful subject. And we're like, man, I don't want to go in there and plot another parabola for 5 minutes, each one. And also you're totally right that when you get into the world, you're not going to be doing that by hand. And so it's got the combination of making math feel like a more painful space than some of these other subjects, and also not setting you up for what you're going to use it for in your life. I think you're spot on with that.
Yeah, I mean, and to me, that's the like, if we think about future ready skills, right? Our job should be to make sure that someone's walking out knowing the knowledge of like what is the reason that you do it, right? Math is so much why and then application of the why, as opposed to just this endless drill and kill idea. But yeah, is it a helpful reference to know that 9 times 9 is 81? Sure. And if you're really tired, guess what? I'll say this is a banker who used to work 120 hours a week. Sometimes you pull your calculator and do 9 times 9 because you're just like, hey, listen, I'm so tired right now.
Yeah, and also you don't want to get that wrong. You want to like you can have the extra confidence. But remembering the time back where you're like, all right, how did I get that? Well, I added 9 to itself 9 times. Like I know what the calculator is doing. I just don't really want to do it. Um, I think is a really, really helpful skill. We've seen this,
I love that.
yeah, on the future ready part. Um, there's been this very fun evolution here at Desmos Studio where I don't know if you've seen this stat, but there's something like the average district uses 2,600 ed tech tools now. It's
Yeah,
something
I've seen somewhere between 1,300 and 2,000, maybe more now at this point. I mean, it's an insane number of things.
astronomical, and most of them are bad. I'm confident in saying, and also the vast majority of them are ones that you're never going to use after you graduate school. And so it's not even teaching useful skill. And we honestly didn't know which one of those Desmos was. Cause like your TI calculator, when you're done, you give it to your younger sib or like you resell it because they carry resale value. But you learn, Excel or a spreadsheet, Google Sheets, whatever it is. And you're going to then use that in college. And you're going to then use that when you're splitting bills with roommates. And you're going to use it when you're calculating your mortgage. And the thing that we had no idea is our tool the kind of former category or the latter category? And we've been seeing this incredibly exciting to us effect of people who are using Desmos in high school are now bringing it with them to college and then bringing them into their jobs. And I think the more that we hold tools to that standard, like if we're going to spend a lot of time in a classroom using this, let's actually look whether it continues to be useful into people's lives. And that should be a big weight on the scale if this is a worthwhile thing.
Wholeheartedly agree. Listen, as someone who still has their 83, their 85, and for the finance people, their HP 12C, Platinum Edition. It's great. It's great. These things are useful tools and they stood the test of time. And I think that to me is we're giving people future ready tools that they can use and apply. By the way, there's such a level of familiarity that then comes when you get to use tools that you're used to. And I love the idea that you build scalability into it. So yeah, can a second grader use it? Sure. Can a 12th grader use it? Sure. Can a mid-career professional use it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And like, that's the best part, why is pen and paper so useful? Right? Because universally applicable.
Yeah. Yeah. It never stops being useful. Yeah.
One thing that I also have really appreciated in our own private conversations has been the idea of rigor. And I think that there's something that needs to be said right now, which is as we move away from the idea that 4-year college for all is the only option, I think we've also built in this somewhat implicit idea that, well, if it's not 4-year college and it's not an Ivy League school, somehow rigor doesn't matter. And yet I'd argue that a kid who is taking a CTE pathway that has them, say, working a Toyota Kanban line right after graduation has more need for math rigor in high school than the kid who's shown up to, hang out with a hacky sack, in New Haven. And I think that this idea that like rigor for all is something that should matter regardless of pathway, we were thinking a lot about that. And I think that what you all do helps create that as a possibility. But I think as you think about CTE pathways, you think about diversification, what people are doing. What are the opportunities you're seeing for us to increase rigor for kind of the non-Ivy League pathway?
Yeah, I think one of the things that has been the most kind of reinforcing that the design that we have for our tool, and I'm going to do this all through the lens of Desmos because that's the lens that I see the world through in too much of the time. But um, with a lot of kind of math projects, there's this idea that there are some people who like doing them, some people who don't, some people who are able to do them, some people who aren't. And a very consistent story that we've heard from teachers is that you put kids in front of our tool, and the result is that everybody has a good time. And often it'll even be the students who are maybe like less drawn to math that outperform. An example of this, just to get concrete. So we thought we were building a graphing calculator, but then a few teachers had these creative projects, and I think these go back a long way, where you would use equations to draw pictures. And so you're like, hey, spell your name using vertical and horizontal lines. It turns out Eli, very, very easy to graph. But there's some others that are harder, or your favorite, team's logo, or your favorite cartoon character, or whatever it is. And we've heard from a lot of folks that this ends up crossing a whole bunch of different interests. And so, the student who fancies themselves as like a little bit more artistic and a little bit less mathematical, well, it turns out you're going to have to do some math to do this, and you're also going to have to do some art to do this. And so now who is thriving in that ends up being everybody instead of just kind of the traditional ones who identify as being math. And we'll often hear from teachers where they're like, the sad version of this is they'll say, hey, I got this incredible project from this student who never does well in my class. Can you confirm that they actually did it and that this wasn't plagiarized? And, 9 times out of 10, we look at it and we're like, yeah, actually, here's all of the work that they did. And you can see all of the productive struggle that happened. And it's very, very exciting to me, this idea that everybody has this innate desire to do math and to do well in math. And you need like having rigor be kind of antithetical to creativity or whatever it is. No, the dream is that they're both kind of woven together. And then we're seeing this in the way that people use Desmos in careers as well. And so, for example, we've been hearing from more and more video game developers who are doing like deep GPU research on how to do graphics, and you want to model those mathematically. But also we're hearing from pharmacists who are using it to figure out what dosing should be for different drugs. And you really do use math in kind of any possible direction that you want to go in your life. And I think you're also spot on that rigor is not just the like exclusive province of, mathematicians and people who are designing computer chips. It's like really, really, really important across all sorts of things. And yeah, I think the idea that it's something that only some people should have or that some people have access to is just absolutely wrong. And we'd love to be part of showing people that's not the case.
I think that makes so much sense. And I think one of the things that you're pointing out, at least to me, is how we structured that classroom to bring that rigor in. You now have so much interesting data, right, around how people are using Desmos or the application of this set of work to the future of work, right? And I think that there can be a disconnect between classroom time and career exploration. It seems like with the data you have, you're opening up this weird portal where you can say, hey, listen, you don't believe me, but 20 years from now, if you're interested in this, like for instance, if you're interested in being in an art gallery having digital art produced, and you've had to learn how to use math to manipulate X, Y, and Z, well, here's how you can be using a calculator and tools to make that happen. Like you can bring real career exploration into the classroom at an early age as concepts are starting to.
I'm obsessed with this. Yeah. Someone's asking, hey, when am I going to use this math? And if you can be like, hey, have you ever played a video game? Because they used math to make that video game. Have you ever driven in a car? Because they used math to design the car and figure out its profile and figure out like how fast should the trunk close so that it's not annoying, but also it won't break your finger? And all of this, like, they use math. And not only did they use math, these are all true stories. They used Desmos to do this. They use the exact same tool that we're using today. How many more people are photographers and fancy themselves photographers now that everybody has this like incredible camera in their pocket, and then it's actually the same tool. I love those ads that are, beautiful billboard that says photographed with an iPhone. It's like, wait, I have that. This isn't just the exclusive province of these people who've gone off to photography school for 15 years and can, develop stuff in their black room that I don't have. Like, this is everyone. You're using the tool today that people are using to do math in the world that you're going to use tomorrow.
And it's interesting because you think about what makes these things great, right? What makes them interesting and useful? What demystifies careers or even introduces careers to kids that they don't even see? Math is at the core of so much of what we do.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Right?
Everywhere.
It's the core of what we do here in education, right? And we think a lot about that. And so I love this idea of how do we connect the future of the world, and not just in a, here's what it could look like. I was a history and poli-sci major. I grew up with 2 lawyers for parents, right? You can see argumentation at the dinner table, how it would play out to their career choices, right? Like, and it's fun to participate in because you get to argue, they argue. Shout out to all the many losses that I took. Many, many victories later were the result of many losses growing up, but you can tie that work together, right? And it makes sense. And you can think about the study. One of the things I love about the study of history and political science, and you can be a great forces or a great humans person, it is the idea of connecting. How do we see things as precipitators of other things? Well, math is no different. Science is no different. We can see how these things build over time or where they build to. I'd love to see us in a world where we can say kids are as excited to learn about where math can take them going forward as they are anything else, because we now can make these connections and we don't do it. And quite frankly, we don't do ourselves any great service, either as educators or for the kids who have to think about that in the future.
Yeah, I love that.
The last piece for me, and I think that you've been hinting at some of this, and I think it moves us in the right direction, which is we've got to think about math differently, right? Our pedagogical approach to it has to change. As you think about the work you've seen and what you've done, if you could kind of like wave a magic wand, what are the top like 2 or 3 things you want to change in the way that we think about both the pedagogy and the way that educators and leaders think about instruction?
Oh man, this is one where I feel so inexpert compared to the people that I get to work with and surround myself with. So I'm trusting that you're asking the same question of the incredible educators around me. I feel like this is not going to be a helpful answer to this question, but to me, I think the biggest impact that we can have on the experience that kids have in a classroom is making sure that awesome teachers want to become teachers and also want to stay being teachers. And so many of my magic wand wishes are things around the way that we treat educators, to be honest. Like, we just need to pay better, and we need to treat folks with more respect and give teachers more autonomy, and all of these factors that, it's a industry that manages to attract just incredibly wonderful principled people and then also drive them away through all sorts of means. And so my biggest magic wand wish is the educators that I get to work with, how do we get more people like that wanting to be in the classroom? And then how do we get them to stay for a long time? Magic wand wish number 1.
I'll just say this. I think that we are in this weird world where life is settled in some ways, right? The thing that matters the most right now is, can we have post-secondary ready students who are capable of persisting going forward? And I think that means that we have to think about how are we opening ourselves up to looking at every subject area a little bit differently and being able to be more flexible and fight resistance. And I think that when we talk to folks about building great teaching and learning organizations, right? They have to be flexible. They have to be principled. They have to be open to experiential learning. And I think most importantly, they have to be open to the idea that you got to get brilliant people in teaching who are supported at every level. And you need to have leaders who are brilliant at creating that environment of continuous improvement, right? And supporting educators on that path. And I think to a certain extent, building champions for new math pedagogy starts with exactly where you talked about, which is who do we want to be as a teaching and learning organization and what are we prioritizing? And I love, I went to a small boys school, and one of the things I think I loved about it the most was from day one, the race was with yourself. That this is an opportunity for us to give you the tools to build the life for yourself that we want. And I think that we've kind of moved away from this idea of looking at kids and saying, who do you want to be? What do you want to do? And like, here are the tools and experiences we can give you to make a great choice for yourself. And so I actually think your answer is the right one, which is, as a teaching and learning organization, our job is to create world-class X, Y, and Z and give them the tools to do so. And maybe the answer lies more in how are we empowering our educators to make that a reality?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I think that's the most important thing. And then I can also speak to, I get to visit a bunch of classrooms and work with a bunch of teachers. And the classrooms that are always the most inspiring, invigorating for me have a few kind of common things going on across them. One of them is that I'm such a fan of the social aspect of learning. The idea that you're learning with other people, the idea that teaching someone else is such a powerful way to learn a concept while also learning how to be kind of a curious and empathetic collaborator. And so even when folks are using devices, I, for example, love it when there's two people sitting at each device and they're talking with each other, and one of them is driving and one of them is guiding, and they're switching back and forth, and you're learning to share and collaborate and grow with another person. Always my favorite structure of a classroom. And I think there's many alternative methods for doing this, the non-permanent vertical surfaces, and where you're kind of all moving and working in groups and that kind of thing. And then the other one is making more and more of the classroom, especially the math classroom, feel like a place where you are kind of the one in control of what's going on, and you are being creative. I feel like so much of the historical way that math was taught that we're thankfully moving away from is just like you sit in your chair and absorb the wisdom of your elders over time. And so much of it has been shifting towards, no, like you are the one trying things out and exploring it yourself and creating things. And of course, there are going to be, you're going to hit a wall, and then you're going to have this brilliant expert who can help guide you over or around the wall. So I'm not the just like figure it out all on your own, throw someone into the deep end of a pool and hope that they figure out how to swim. But I love the idea that you're doing it towards a purpose that you've defined. You want to create this piece of art. You want to understand this weird concept. My favorite anecdote for this, going back to the art projects that we did, was, or we didn't do, but back in 2014, this is really early, and we see a blog post from a teacher who had been at the end of their Algebra 2 course asking students to draw a picture using math. And the example he gave was this student who was he described as a straight C student, just like not super motivated, not doing a great job of math, wanted to draw a picture of a fish with an eye. And to get this right, needed to use ellipses, which they'd learned in this course, but also wanted to rotate them because, the ellipse that's here, they wanted to look like this. And over here, they wanted it to look like this at a diagonal. And he had not taught them how to rotate ellipses. But now there's a purpose. They're like, I want this to look like a realistic eye, so it's going to need an ellipse, and it's going to need to be at a 45-degree angle. And they go on Wikipedia and they learn the equation of a rotated ellipse and build it into their project. And then their classmates are like, what? How did you rotate that ellipse? I didn't even know you could do that. And they're like, let me show you. And the whole thing just motivated by this very kind of from inside them purpose of wanting to make a thing look like the thing that they wanted it to look like. And they could see it in their head, but now they need to figure out the math to make it happen. And the more that we can put students in that position, the more motivating it'll be to learn, the further they're going to push. This teacher would have never considered teaching rotated ellipses because that's not in the syllabus, right? But now they get to have a conversation about this and talk about the math of it. And that to me is just the most perfect version of this.
I can't think of a better place to end on than that. I gotta though say, before we sign off, we talked a little bit about what brings you into this. I think we've had a lot going on in our industry. And one of my favorite questions to ask at the end is, what keeps you hopeful from what you see?
Honestly, two things, and it's all about the people. The thing that gets me going every single day is that I work with just like really wonderful colleagues who I feel like I can learn from. The thing that when I'm down, I will sign into, it used to be Twitter and now maybe it's Blue Sky, and just talk with some teachers who are benefiting from our work. But the thing that gives me hope for the future is the quality of what some of these young people are able to do on our site. So we every year do this event. It's an annual event. Call it the Desmos Art Expo. And it's anyone from around the world can submit art that they made with math. And it started just from this kind of organic community of people doing things like that project. So desmos.com/art if you want to look. It is completely unhinged what these kids are able to make. We had more than 10,000 people participate this last year, and so many of them going down to age 13, 14, doing, making things with math, exploring, explaining inside of their graphs that go way beyond what I'm able to do with our tool. And I just am very, very inspired and encouraged by the creativity, by the values, by the just incredible caliber of the generation that will someday, I know one of those kids is going to make the calculator that puts us out of business, just like we hopefully are going to help this instrument. And that doesn't make me sad. That makes me thrilled.
Listen, I love that. We're all here to be, hopefully, the shoulders that the next set of giants stand on.
Amen.
Right. And if we're doing our jobs right, that's where we'll be. Well, listen, Eli Luberoff, founder of Desmos, one of my favorite conversations, one of my first welcomes into this industry. It's been so great to get to chat with you. A thank you to our audience. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to share. Find more episodes on podcast.betterlesson.com. Eli, thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That wraps another episode of the Lessons Learned podcast. Thank you for listening. For show notes and more about Better Lesson, please visit betterlesson.com/podcast. Lessons Learned is hosted by Better Lesson, the leading provider of data-driven, high-impact, system-wide K-12 teaching and learning solutions. We partner with states and districts to support every educator in developing the next generation of resourceful, compassionate, and resilient learners who are college and career ready. Our work has impacted more than 80,000 educators and nearly 3 million students nationwide. See you in the next episode.